So imagine if we were to take a group of babies and put them in an environment where they were cared for. So, we had robots giving them food and changing their nappies, and all of their basic needs were cared for. But the only company they had was one another. In 15, 20 years, presumably they would have their own language. And again, this would not be approved by an ethics board. I'm proposing this study.
What will happen is that they will arrest you first.
I know. But let's say we did that. Would they have their own language after 15 or 20? Like we would come back and find them talking, right?
Okay. If let's say that while they grew up, they had access to someone else talking, yes. However, there's been experimented, again, we're not probably they're not ethical, but not experiment, but I would talk more about studies. There's been studies about like children who had issue growing up, like not a good family, not a good caretaker. So some of these children, when find, for example, that they didn't have contact with outside world, but only with one caretaker or stuff like that. What we saw particularly was one child. This child was isolated for 13 years. At the age of 13, this child was saved and put in an environment where there were like people that could caretake, people that could teach language and all sorts of stuff. So what we saw is that this child, unfortunately, struggled. Because for what I said before, like when you're a child, it's way easier. So when you grow up, it becomes harder and harder. So especially at the beginning, this child took really long time, and still, for the side what that study says is that still has some difficulties in communication.
But for those 13 years, was the child completely alone?
Only with one caretaker, one of the parent, isolated by the rest of society.
So they weren't talking with that parent though?
Yes, they were talking with it. It was the kid and the parent talking, and that's it.
But you're saying that so obviously that's not healthy for a number of reasons, but just in the context of language, that's not enough to learn a language, one person?
Probably not enough, because the vocabulary that the father was using was not enough, and the interaction between the kid and the father were not, like proper interaction, not many interaction as well. So the child didn't have the language input they're required to acquire language.
Right.
So that's the thing. So
what you're saying is we should try my experiment.
No, please, I don't advise
You're endorsing my idea. You heard it here first.
No, didn't say that. No, absolutely. We can't do for ethical reason that. But what we know is that, again, exposure to the language, it's probably the most significant things that has an impact in the way or how much you acquire the language. And always you need to remember as well that I hear this from a lot of students, like, oh, I've been studying for 4 months, I still can't speak. That's normal. Like language also follow a direction. There's always perception first.
The silent period, right?
Exactly. Good job. Hey, you prepared. So there's always perception.
Wow. You're the third, fourth person to say that on this show. It's like everyone's surprised if I give the impression that I don't prepare for these interviews. I don't know.
No, you're very prepared. It's a good to test. But yes, like you develop perception. And just in a second moment, you develop ability to talk. So that's the thing. So perception always first, and then communication, talking after. And this happens regardless of your first language, second language, third language. For all these languages, always the same happen. There is this silent period, a period in which the learner, it looks like he's not learning. Like you see a child, no? The mom tried to say something, the kid just look at her, but doesn't say anything. He's actually learning. The brain is doing like a complex work to remember, and not only remember words, but try to guess how the language works. And this is amazing. There is something called the GOED syndrome, GOED, like in English, GOED, that basically we know that kids at a certain age, when they start to learn English as a first language, they make some mistake. What happened? At some point, they learn that to make the past, they need to add ed at the end. I worked, for example. But then they overgeneralize this and they apply this also to verbs that are irregular. So they go, okay, right. But they don't know, they're a child. So all these happen in the brain like spontaneously. And the interesting thing is that the exactly same thing, same type of like mistake, but it only like highlight the fact that the child is actually, start to make hypotheses about a language. It happened for all the languages, regardless of the native speaker, second language, third language. It happens to children in Italy. It happens to children in Japan. Always the same. Like these sorts of mistakes are so similar that it's really interesting to study them. So that's why some people think that the way you acquire a language, first, second, third one, there is some mechanism for which is almost the same. And something, like regardless of the language itself, something happens in the brain for which the brain starts to test hypotheses. So that mistake that the child makes saying God is not really anymore seen as a mistake. It's actually good proof that the child, like his brain, he starts to analyze the language and he starts to testing hypotheses like, oh, since I put ed at the end of worked, maybe I can put it in good as well.
Did you enjoy that clip? Did you not? It doesn't matter to me. Subscribe. For the love of God.